My name is Leanne Sexsmith, and I'm a grants manager with the Real Estate Foundation of BC. I would like to first begin by acknowledging that we are on the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. I'd like to thank you all very much for coming today to share your insights on how we can collectively accelerate progress towards a more sustainable built environment in BC. We really appreciate the breadth and depth of knowledge in this room today. It's an extraordinary opportunity for the Real Estate Foundation and hopefully for many of the partners who are interested in this work moving forward. So the Real Estate Foundation, who are we and what do we do? We are a philanthropic organization that helps advance sustainable land use across British Columbia. Our legislated mandate is to carry out real estate-related research, public and professional education, and law reform. And we do this largely through grants to nonprofits, but increasingly through other initiatives as well, where we are trying to take a more strategic role, often in partnership with others, to lead research and special projects that support collaboration and knowledge sharing around land use. So it is important to note that we're not government, we're not the real estate industry, we are an independent philanthropic organization. Our funding comes from interest on deposits from real estate transactions that's held in trust by brokerages. And through our grants and other initiatives, we use this funding for the benefit of communities. Our vision is to support land use and real estate practices that contribute to resilient, healthy communities and natural environments now and in the future. We focus our efforts in 5 areas that are all highly relevant to land use and real estate. And one of these, of course, is built environment sustainability and the focus of our initiative today. By built environment, we mean the buildings and infrastructure that support human settlement, or more simply, the physical stuff of which our communities are made. A year ago, the Foundation began the first phase of this initiative on built environment sustainability because as a funder wanting to affect positive change in this area, we felt it was important to understand the current state and the strongest levers of influence for accelerating change further. So the phase 1 research was conducted over the past year and completed in the fall, and we're now in phase 2 where we're seeking feedback on our findings and establishing priorities and identifying ways to collaborate on some of the strategic interventions. To date, over 100 leaders from all sectors of the built environment have participated, and we aim to continue to work in partnership moving forward. Overall, the phase 1 results showed some bright spots, but also some systemic challenges. There's clearly a high level of knowledge and interest amongst professionals and policymakers, and some significant progress has been made in policies and plans, but it has not resulted in widespread change on the ground. And in many ways, policymakers and professionals have struggled to connect the dots with the public and at the political level, and there's a lack of alignment between different actors, policies, and interventions. So given this state, our key question now and the focus today is what can we do to accelerate progress now? For us, success by the end of today will mean that we will have shared a deeper understanding of the problems and solutions, become more clear about our priorities, explored a common foundation for moving forward, and we will have identified partners with whom we can engage further. So to achieve that today, this is our agenda that we'll be working through. And I do want to just highlight that we'll be using Chatham House rules for the most part, particularly during the table discussion amongst your groups. Feel free to talk about the event afterwards, but we ask you don't attribute specifics to individual people. And the Real Estate Foundation will respect the same convention. We are videoing the event, however, so obviously during the report backs and other key moments that are captured by Malcolm, that will be recorded and shared. So please let us know if you don't want to be recorded in any of those key segments. Okay? Good. Okay, well, with that, I think I will turn it over to Rob, who's going to delve into some of the findings a bit deeper. Thank you.
Okay, so as Leanne says, I'm going to go through some of the research that we did in phase one of this work. And I have to say it was really gratifying to be able to take a step back for a change. Like many of you, I'm kind of stuck in the trenches and the details of projects and detailed work. And it's really nice for us to be able to take a step back and ask some big questions about where are we at in terms of the built environment in BC? Are we making progress? Are we actually moving towards the kind of change that we want to see? So this research was a great opportunity to do that. So we were commissioned to conduct this research and ask some, these kind of big questions. We started off with a vision and definition of the sustainable built environment. And for us, it was really about enabling people to have a great quality of life without undermining the natural systems that support us. So a sustainable built environment is a place that is resource efficient, it's resilient, it's prosperous, it's equitable, healthy, it's safe, attractive, and authentic. And so, that for us, and through the research that we did, talking to many of you, was kind of where we need to go, where we need to head. But it also was very clear from the conversations that this is also about a process, that really the vision emerges from a social conversation, the kind of conversations that we're having today. And it's the kind of conversation that seeks to resolve trade-offs, drive innovation, and eventually create development that is aligned with core community values. And I think you'll hear more from us about that as we go forward. We also thought of the built environment not as a static entity, but as a system that's nested in a broader natural environmental system. And we thought of it as really two main components: the actual physical built environment itself, the buildings, the transportation systems, the infrastructure, the housing, and the patterns of land use and density that weave those together. So, the physical stuff of the built environment. But then there's also the socioeconomic system, the levers that we use as society to have an influence on the built environment. So things like policies, technical knowledge, legal and regulatory work, education, organizational development. So there are two real places where we can have an intervention in the built environment. So we can either have a strong intervention in the actual design and construction piece, but we can also have an intervention in terms of the socioeconomic framework and how we exert those forces on the built environment. And that's really where the main focus of probably much of your work, and certainly the work of the Real Estate Foundation, is. So we produced a number of different reports, and they're all available on the Real Estate Foundation's website. Mainly what I'm talking about is the initial work that we did, which is the Status, Trends, and Future Prospects, a discussion paper. There was also a synthesis of the findings, which will weave together kind of all the work we're going to be talking about today. And the Real Estate Foundation also commissioned McAllister Opinion Research to do some public information research about how the public thinks about the built environment in BC. And then finally, there is a report that kind of looks at different models and philosophies around collaboration that will inform some of the work that we do today. So as Leanne says, there are really some bright spots, but also some significant barriers and challenges when we look in a big picture way at the state of the sustainable built environment. So there's been significant progress made in policy. There's some really great success stories around the province. But despite the effort and great attention that this topic has been given over the last 20 to 30 years, our conclusion is that BC's built environment is generally not becoming more sustainable in many ways. And the reason is that there's great intent. There are great plans, there are great policies out there, there's lots of discussion. But we really do have a big gap between that intent, the plans and policies and the action and implementation on the ground. And consequently, we're not really seeing the results in terms of actual physical and behavioral changes that we need to see. So that's really, the reason we wanted to bring you together, is to reflect on that and say, okay, how can we really accelerate change, make deeper and more lasting change than we have to date? So just taking a look at the 4 different sectors that we researched in the research. So the first one was buildings, energy, and infrastructure. And on the building side, I think we've seen great progress across BC, and BC has been a real leader in this regard. There's a number of very progressive organizations, including the Canada Green Building Council, the application of LEED, and we've seen those innovations actually translate into a shift in regulations. So we've seen the BC Building Code shift and improve over time. So it's not just innovation, it's actually mainstreaming of practice. We are seeing some concern about the actual performance of some new green buildings, so they're not always living up to the expectations. And in part, that's because of complex technologies that are not working as predicted. And we're certainly struggling with the energy efficiency and improving the energy efficiency of the existing building stock. So despite a number of attempts, we haven't really made significant progress in terms of improving the energy efficiency of existing buildings. We also really need to scale up some of the great innovations and advanced projects that have been seen in BC and scale that up to apply across a much broader range of the province. On the infrastructure side, we've seen great progress on stormwater management, creating stormwater management guidelines and policy that have really had a profound effect on how we do planning and development work. We've seen some progress in terms of solid waste management. And we're also seeing great progress in terms of energy systems and rapid advances in the technology that allows us to do district energy, for instance. So really some good news on that front. So when we look at transportation, obviously in the Lower Mainland we've had some challenges here. Funding continues to be the real primary constraint in terms of making progress on sustainable transportation. And we have this real clash of ideologies and priorities within this region, but within the whole province as well. We are seeing a growing recognition, I think, of the link between sustainable transportation and affordability and livability. So we're starting to look not just at transportation and affordable housing, but looking at the relationship of those two things. But we're still continuing to miss the connection, this really fundamental connection between transportation and land use in a lot of policy around the province. And significantly, when we looked at the results, even in Metro Vancouver, where we've been doing this work for decades, it seems, there hasn't been a real significant shift away from single occupant vehicles, as that graph indicates. So really concerning when you think about the level of effort, time and money that's gone into trying to make progress on sustainable transportation. In terms of housing, obviously we're having ongoing challenges with housing affordability. We're still talking in terms of crisis often when we're talking about affordability. Over half of renters in BC are still paying more than 30% of their income on shelter. We're also still missing the kind of middle level of density. We tend to have the single family and then the towers, but what we're really still lacking in a lot of communities is that middle level of ground-oriented density, the townhouses, the more compact forms of single family and semi-detached units, and cluster housing. So that's still a challenge, and still lots of challenges in terms of getting communities to accept density, as seeing density as something that's positive and can contribute to their community. And in some ways, that's because density is not delivering on the promise of affordability. And then when we look at integrated communities and land use planning overall, we've got this great legacy of regional planning in this region and seeing it emerging in other regions as well. And that is having a positive effect, although we're still struggling with this concept of regional planning, that it's still very political. The framework isn't really in place to do it as effectively as we need to. We are seeing emerging city centres springing up around the region and in other areas where city centres are becoming denser and more mixed use and served by rapid transit. So there is positive news there. Seeing this kind of growing recognition of the links between the built environment and health, which has been a really positive move forward. So we have this great intent, but we have really still a wide gap between the plans, actions, and results. And as I've said, we've had these great pockets of innovation. I think we're seeing a much more increased level of understanding and sophistication amongst professionals and amongst the public to a certain extent. But we are struggling to scale up the great innovations that we see in this province and in the region to create this province-wide progress that we need. We're also failing, as Leanne said, to connect the dots between what the politicians, we as technical people do and what the public and politicians really value. And so this is where we think there needs to be much more progress. So we're at really this delicate point where more progress is needed to validate public trust in planning, design, development, and confirm the potential of the policy shifts that we've made, but haven't really implemented to the fullest extent at the moment. So without this progress, without beneficial progress, we think we may lose the public in this conversation. So what's really promising, though, and I think what came out of this work, we talked to 150 individuals as part of this work, is there is this amazing wellspring of capacity in BC. There's great enthusiasm for change, and that exists amongst the professionals and the public as well. So we really think that we've got the foundation to make profound transformative change. We just haven't quite got there yet. So just also briefly touching on the public opinion work that was done by Angus McAllister. So this was to better understand public values and views as part of the overall initiative. So McAllister Research talked to 1,700 survey respondents across BC and across a range of communities, different sizes and different locations across BC, including very urban places, small towns, small cities, and suburban areas. And they looked at 7 different areas or themes as they looked at the results and analysis. So the good news is that 81% of BC residents said that the quality of life in their neighborhood is good or excellent. So that was really positive to hear. When Angus asked BC residents what they want more of in their region, and this was from a predefined list, energy efficiency was the top choice. So, and across the board, urban, rural, small city, people wanted greater energy efficiency. Green buildings was also, perhaps surprisingly, a very popular thing that BC residents said they wanted. Sustainable transportation as well, especially in urban areas, but really, again, across the board, and public transit. And then people also said they wanted smart growth. Typically, in small cities, people were really keen on smart growth, 71%. In rural areas and suburban areas, a bit less so, but interesting results. But when we asked, or when he asked for people for an unprompted list or an open-ended question, the results were a little bit different. So people said they really wanted greater transportation, public transit. Green space was very important to people as one of their priorities. Policing and public safety came up a lot. And not surprisingly, affordable housing was amongst the top list of people's asks for improvement. And it became very clear that density, probably no surprise, comes with mixed feelings. Less support for high-rise forms of development, much greater support for low-rise, mixed income, and single detached homes. And there is a lot of support for sustainable design, but it also became clear that language, words really matter in terms of the public's perception and level of support for certain concepts. So when we looked at things like energy, then energy efficiency was a very popular concept, but things like carbon neutral buildings, less so. When we looked at things like density, the term smart growth really resonated, but compact communities, high density communities, less so. So the words were really important, clearly really matter. So in terms of just a summary of observations then, so there's strong alignment between many of the public views and sustainability goals, which is great news. The language and the form of buildings really matter to people. People want nature and green space, but they also want more roads and parking, so there's a trade-off there. Growth and development is a top reason people feel their community is better than it was 10 years ago. But sprawl and development is a top reason people feel it is worse. Density, as I've said, comes with mixed feelings. And there's certainly less support for high density, high rise and compact communities, and more support for the concepts of low rise, mixed income housing, single detached and smart growth. And affordability, of course, remains a key desire. Okay, so that's it from me. We're going to go straight into, I think, Pete's presentation on priorities. Thanks, folks.
All right, one quick note on the public poll results. The Real Estate Foundation has just released those on the website as of, I think, last night. So there's an executive summary and the full report. And we have display copies of the reports at the front table. So if you want to have a look at them and hold them in your hands, at least momentarily, please come up and have a look at them at the break. And they're all available online through the Real Estate Foundation's website. Okay, so excuse me, based on the research that Rob just described, we sat down and asked ourselves, well, what should we do about it? If we're trying to shift from policy and words to action, what are the things that we ought to do in order to do that? And so we established some preliminary priorities. I'm going to walk you through how we did that and list for you briefly what those are. And then we'll move into a table exercise, which will let you get into a bit more depth on that topic. So the first thing we did was ask ourselves, if we're trying to create change, how do we even think about change in a big, broad system like the built environment system? So we looked at some basics of systems theory, different types of interventions and how influential they can be. We looked at the idea of market transformation or the diffusion of innovation curve, which you might be more familiar with in terms of moving from innovators to early adopters, early market, and all the way down to laggards. That kind of curve and the types of policy instruments that are appropriate at different stages along that path. The third thing is we looked at force field theory, and here again took a pretty light view, but basically said, look, you can either promote change by pushing change, or you can remove barriers to change and allow that change to happen. And one of the things force field theory says is simply, if you try to push people into a barrier, they're just going to get frustrated and annoyed. So it's better to take those barriers down first and then push them past them later. Last, we looked at social change and cultural change concepts and tried to draw from that some information about messaging and approaches that would be helpful. So as you can see from the bottom of the diagram, we took a whole set of possible interventions. There were a couple of hundred, I think, that we filtered down to provide some preliminary priorities. So we divided those preliminary priorities into two different categories. The first are titled strategic interventions, and these are broad themes which came out of the research. The first of these is aligning the financial rules of the system with sustainability objectives. So talking about aligning resource pricing with those objectives, road pricing and the carbon tax are two good examples of that. And the second is expanding the use of full cost and life cycle accounting, which relates directly to asset management in BC, but could also relate to development approvals. The second piece is supporting and coordinating nonprofit groups and others. So really realizing that business, government, and nonprofits all need to work together in order to make progress. They each have complementary roles. And there were a few components that we thought were really critical. One was collecting and communicating research on sustainability performance, because there isn't kind of a one-stop shop, as we discovered writing the report, to know what's going on and how well we're doing. Second, there really aren't much in the way of goals and targets with the exception of greenhouse gas targets in BC. Third, many nonprofit groups have a hard time getting ongoing funding so they can do longer term projects and build some momentum. So that's a third important piece. And the last one we've talked about probably a little bit too much already is collaborating, really realizing that we have different roles to play and we can work together and be more effective. Third piece, securing consistent senior government funding. There are a number of areas where that would really help. It might not be essential, but it would really help. And transit, affordable housing, infrastructure renewal, flood protection, and climate adaptation were the obvious ones for us coming out of our research. Now, scaling up sustainable practice is the fourth one. There's a lot of work on innovation, and there's work in transferring those innovations into the market, really mainstreaming them. And from the research, it seemed like there were a lot of innovations that were out there, some really bright spots that Rob mentioned, but it's not getting out there fast enough and effectively enough. So the question, really the priority, if you like, was let's scale up the sustainable practice that many people in this room know well. Let's do whatever we can to move that out into the mainstream to the rest of our colleagues. So building a province-wide knowledge base, not a database, but a knowledge base, supporting projects that incorporate education, professional education in particular, and supporting risk-taking. So in a local government environment where it's often difficult to take risks, let's look at how we can free up our colleagues in local government so they can more easily take risks, learn from that, share that with us and their colleagues. The fifth and last one is building public awareness and support. So the public poll results were really interesting. They said the public's kind of confused about all this stuff. They want less traffic, but they also want more roads and parking. They want sustainable transportation equally. So helping the public to understand what all this stuff is about, and particularly for us as professionals, also understanding what the public cares about and aligning what we're doing with those public values so we can actually communicate it effectively to them. The second piece is that more effective communication. So focusing on the multiple benefits, the health benefits, the lower tax benefits of smart growth and green buildings and other things, that we can really help people understand why this meets their needs. And last, we heard some great stuff in the research about experiential learning and the impact that can have on the public as well as professionals. So looking for ways really to drive that experience through educational processes. The second category is targeted initiatives, and I'll run through these a little bit more quickly. They were specific to one of the sectors in which we were looking. First one was strengthening regional planning and leadership, not necessarily through legislative change, but looking at ways to make that regional coordination work better, to get better land use and transportation patterns across jurisdictions. Second, improving asset management. We all know this is a huge piece. Asset Management BC is doing great work, but it's very urgent, and improving and accelerating the progress of that practice in BC is important. Rob already mentioned market penetration of green retrofits. This is a key issue, and I know one that some folks in this room are working on, as well as lots of others. Rebalancing transportation funding towards transit and active modes. Cycling, for example, the mode share seems to be about the same as the investment share on a provincial level. And the suggestion is if you increase the investment, that there's latent demand and that might actually come up to meet it. Similarly in transit, the funding has basically been static, and increasing it would, again, allow that latent demand to come through. Another one Rob mentioned is the market penetration of that sort of missing middle of housing, which we've heard more and more about over the last 6 to 12 months. And the last one is supporting smart growth principles through integration of transportation and land use and maybe other things. And there's a good set of principles established. It's a term that resonates in the public mind. So the idea is, look, let's build on that. Let's not lose it. And let's see how much momentum we can build on what's already out there. So you've had to listen to us for a while. We want to listen to you for a while and give you a chance to talk to one another. So what we'd like to do is give you about a half an hour. And by the way, we started 20 minutes late, so we're trying to squeeze a little bit out of every part of the session so we don't miss anything. But the prioritization exercise, the first piece at your tables, we'll do a self-facilitation for this session and for the rest of the event. Review and discuss the overarching recommendations, so the ones that I just presented, at your table, and you'll have about 15 minutes just for a loose discussion of them. It'll give you some time to get more familiar with them. And a key question for us is there anything missing? After that 15 minutes is up, I'll come up to the front and let you know to switch to the next piece, which is to identify the top 3 interventions for your sector in BC for the next 3 to 5 years. So if you had to turn around tomorrow, someone gave you $100,000 to do a project, what would you do? Where would it fit in those strategic interventions and targeted initiatives? And for that, I'll ask each table to assign a note taker, and then we'll do a silent reflection where you'll write your top 3. Each individual person will write their top 3 interventions on stickies, 1 per sticky, and then you'll share around the table and group them. And then as a group, you'll write down the top 3, and then we'll ask you to report back.